If you have $500,000 invested for retirement, I'm going to say something that might make you uncomfortable. You're not secure yet. In fact, there's a strong chance you're in the most dangerous phase of your financial journey, the stage where people slow down, relax too early, and quietly sabotage years of retirement planning without realizing it. $500,000 feels like a victory. It feels like financial maturity. It feels like you finally avoided the retirement mistakes that derail so many others. But here's the paradox. The first $500K is brutal, not because it's small, but because it's deceptive. It creates a false sense of progress. You look at your 401K, see that clean round number, and think, now the market will do the rest. Yet statistically, this is exactly the point where many people make the mistake that makes the next phase harder than it needs to be. And I'll explain that mistake shortly because it's subtle, rational, and feels smart when you make it. But before we get there, we need to understand why the climb to $500K feels so heavy, emotionally draining, and mathematically slow, and why after a certain point, the game changes completely. If you understand that transition, you won't just avoid one of the most expensive 401K mistakes of your life. You'll begin to see your financial freedom structurally, not emotionally. Now let me show you what's really happening between 0 and $500,000. When someone looks at their account and sees $500K in retirement savings, the first reaction is usually pride. $500,000 sounds like a victory, like retirement planning is finally on track. I've seen this moment many times. Someone opens their 401K statement, takes a deep breath, and thinks, now I'm safe. But let me ask you a simple question. Safe for what exactly? Because when we put that number into practical terms, the tone of the conversation changes. If we apply the classic 4% rule, we're talking about roughly $20,000 per year, and that's where the uncomfortable silence begins. $20,000 doesn't sustain a typical lifestyle. It doesn't comfortably cover a strong health insurance plan. It doesn't replace the salary you earned for decades. One of the most common retirement mistakes is confusing accumulated assets with sustainable income. The account balance looks large, but the income it produces doesn't yet deliver financial freedom. I remember a couple I met at a workshop about how to retire. They had just over $520K invested in broad ETFs like VTI and SPY, and they were proud, understandably so. But when we ran projections that included Social Security, inflation, and real-world spending, they realized they couldn't retire early the way they had imagined. It wasn't a lack of discipline. It was simply math applied to reality. And math sometimes is less romantic than we'd like. But here's the part almost no one explains calmly. Feeling that frustration doesn't mean you failed at investing for retirement. It means you're moving through one of the most uncomfortable stages of the journey. The sense of this isn't enough stings, but it carries an important message. And before you start making drastic changes or committing new 401K mistakes out of impulse, it's worth understanding why this stage feels so heavy and what's really happening behind that number. Between 0 and $500K, it feels like you're pushing a piano uphill by yourself. The market helps, of course. But what truly builds that foundation is you, your monthly contributions, your discipline, your ability to avoid basic retirement mistakes. This is the phase where every deposit feels earned. You cut an expense here, invest a little more there, choose a broad ETF instead of chasing the next hot stock. It's quiet work. And here's something important. If you stop contributing during this stage, growth almost stalls. I've seen it happen. People reach $300K, feel encouraged, and reduce their contributions thinking, now the market will take it from here. But at this point, compounding hasn't reached critical mass yet. The real engine of your retirement planning is still you. And that can be exhausting because it requires consistency, not glamour. Simply put, before $500K, your monthly deposits matter more than your returns. It's like planting a tree. In the early years, you water it, fertilize it, protect it from wind. The tree doesn't provide shade yet. Many people lose motivation right there. They commit 401K mistakes like pausing contributions or withdrawing funds to solve something urgent. and each interruption delays the stability that always seems just out of reach. Maybe you've looked at your statement and thought, after all this, that's it? That question is legitimate, but it reveals something deeper. It's not just about numbers, it's about expectation. We want visible progress. We want clear signs that we're on the right path. But compound growth is subtle in the beginning. And understanding why it feels so slow completely changes how you see this stage of the journey. Let me propose something different. If this video has changed the way you see your $500K even slightly, then don't subscribe for me. Subscribe as a silent contract with your own discipline. Because people who truly build meaningful retirement savings don't consume content for entertainment, they consume it for strategy. And every video here is designed to help you avoid retirement mistakes that can cost you years. So here's what I'd suggest. If this deeper kind of conversation resonates with you, hit subscribe and leave a like now, not as applause, but as a commitment to your own financial freedom. Let's simplify this like we're scribbling numbers on a napkin at the table. If you have $100K invested and earn an average 7% per year, that's about $7,000 in growth. Solid? Yes. Life-changing? Not really. At $300K, you're looking at roughly $21,000 per year. At $500K, about $35,000. See the pattern? It's growing, but it still doesn't feel dramatic. It doesn't scream financial freedom. It doesn't feel like you've made it. In the early stages of investing for retirement, compounding feels like a quiet bonus. Your money is whispering, not shouting. And that's where one of the most dangerous retirement mistakes creeps in, assuming it's not working because the growth isn't explosive. But compound growth has a strange characteristic. It requires critical mass. Before that point, it feels slow, like an engine warming up. I've seen people at $350K start questioning everything. They want to switch ETFs, pick individual stocks, take on more risk, as if the solution is hiding in a secret shortcut. But often the issue isn't the investment choice, whether it's a broad fund like VOO or a balanced portfolio. It's misaligned expectations. Retirement planning isn't about immediate excitement. It's about sustained consistency. Once you understand this math, something shifts internally. You realize the game isn't about spectacular early returns. It's about strategic survival until you reach sufficient scale. And here's the part almost no one talks about. After a certain point, the behavior of the numbers changes. And when it changes in a surprisingly powerful way. There's a subtle moment in retirement planning that almost no one clearly highlights. It's not when you become a millionaire. It's not when you hit exactly $500K. It's when your portfolio starts growing more from interest than from your own contributions. That's the psychological dividing line. It's when investing for retirement stops feeling like a solo effort and starts feeling like a partnership. Imagine you're investing $20,000 per year. While your portfolio is under $400K or $500K, your contributions are still doing most of the heavy lifting. But once you move past that range, a decent market year can add $40,000, $50,000 or more without you increasing your deposits by a single dollar. That's when many people say, now I feel it. And it's not just a feeling, it's structural math. I remember an investor who tracked his results almost obsessively every month. For years, it felt like he was pushing the mountain upward himself. But the year he crossed just over $500,000, he noticed something. His annual growth exceeded what he was able to save from his job. That changed his relationship with money. It wasn't just discipline anymore. It was leverage. And leverage reduces anxiety about Social Security, about how to retire, about whether retiring early is realistic or not. But there's an important detail here. Before you reach this turning point, there's an emotionally dangerous phase, a kind of middle stretch that tests your patience and your financial identity. Because not everyone reaches the turning point. Many stop just before it, precisely when they're closer than they realize. There's a quiet stretch between $300K and $500K that no one romanticizes. You've been investing for years. You've avoided multiple retirement mistakes. You've learned through experience what works in retirement planning, and yet you don't feel free. It's like running a marathon and realizing you're at mile 20, close enough to see progress, but still not at the finish line. This is the stage where comparison starts whispering in your ear. You hear someone talk about having $1 million invested. Someone else says they'll retire early at 55, and you begin wondering if you fell behind. But comparison ignores context, income, inheritances, time in the market, risk tolerance, life decisions. Every journey has its own pace. Comparing different chapters of different stories often leads to rush decisions, and rush decisions frequently turn into 401 cake mistakes. I've spoken with people in this phase who began questioning everything. They wanted to overhaul their investing for retirement strategy, move from broad ETFs into concentrated bets, or even reduce contributions because it's already decent. The problem is that this doubt appears precisely when discipline should be strongest. It's like turning off the oven minutes before the cake is done. The recipe was solid, the timing just hadn't completed its cycle. The middle of the journey tests your emotions more than your finances. It quietly asks, are you investing out of conviction or just early enthusiasm? If you move through this phase with consistency, the structure eventually begins to shift in your favor. But if you give in to fatigue, you can make the first $500K far harder than it ever needed to be. And that's exactly where a subtle mistake tends to slip, in one that many people don't even realize they're making. Now, I want to try something with you without opening your banking app, without checking your 401k, just from memory. Do you know how much your portfolio generated in the last year? If you do, write only the number in the comments. If you don't, write, need to track it better, because there's a huge difference between someone who invests and someone who truly practices intentional retirement planning. I read the comments, and sometimes a single answer already reveals whether someone is actively building wealth or simply hoping it builds itself. There's a subtle behavior that tends to show up when the number starts looking impressive. Someone reaches $400K, crosses $450K, sees $500K on the statement, and relaxes too early. They reduce contributions, assume the heavy lifting is done. Sometimes they upgrade their lifestyle, a new car, higher fixed expenses, a few long-delayed upgrades. It's not irresponsibility. It's a sense of having earned it. But in retirement planning, timing is everything. One of the most common retirement mistakes at this stage is reducing risk or contributions prematurely. The thought process sounds reasonable. Now I need to protect what I've built. Emotionally, that makes sense. Mathematically, it can delay the turning point. If you slow down before reaching sufficient scale, compounding loses momentum. It's like pushing a snowball halfway up the hill and stopping right before the downhill acceleration begins. I've seen someone hit $500,000 and immediately shift almost everything into ultra-conservative assets. They wanted absolute security. The problem? With inflation and increasing life expectancy, the portfolio stagnated. The financial freedom that once felt close started to drift away again. Not because the plan was bad, because the strategy changed at the wrong moment. The first $500K demands almost stubborn consistency. It's not glamorous, it's intelligent repetition. And when you maintain that consistency for a few more years, something interesting happens. The effort begins to decrease proportionally. It's as if the money finally starts carrying part of the weight. And that's when the dynamic truly changes. There's a quiet moment when you realize you're no longer carrying the entire weight alone. At $500K invested, a 7% average return means roughly $35,000 in a year. At $700K, you're approaching $50,000. At $1 million, about $70,000. Notice the shift. In a single reasonable year, your portfolio's growth can start to match or even exceed what you're able to contribute through work. I've seen people genuinely surprised when this clicks. For years, they focused on increasing contributions, cutting expenses, avoiding retirement mistakes. Then suddenly, a strong market year adds the equivalent of a new car or several months of salary without them doing anything different. That's the moment investing for retirement stops feeling like pure discipline and starts feeling like partnership. The market is no longer just a spectator, it becomes a collaborator. This doesn't mean everything becomes easy overnight. Volatility still exists. Downturns still happen. Social Security is still part of the overall structure. But the emotional tone changes. You begin to see more clearly how to retire safely, maybe even with room to consider retiring early if the numbers align. The mountain that once felt endless starts revealing a gentle slope on the other side. But here's the detail few people talk about. When your money begins doing more of the work, a new temptation appears. The temptation to believe it's basically handled now. And that false sense of security can be just as dangerous as the frustration at the beginning. Reaching $500K is a real achievement. Let's not downplay that. For many people, it represents decades of avoiding retirement mistakes, consistently contributing to a 401 KEC, choosing solid funds, and staying committed to investing for retirement even when the market felt intimidating. But here's the subtle trap: confusing meaningful progress with the finish line. I've seen people hit $500,000 and shift into a kind of defense mode. They drastically reduce risk, stop increasing contributions, and think, now I just need to wait. In certain contexts, depending on age and structure, that can make sense, but often it's too early. The portfolio may look substantial, but it may not yet generate enough sustainable income to support true financial freedom, especially when you factor in inflation and longer life expectancy. Another common behavior at this stage is upgrading lifestyle based on net worth rather than income. The account balance grows, confidence rises, and decisions start being made as if independence is already secured. This is one of the least discussed retirement mistakes. The number feels comfortable, but it may not yet provide the margin needed for healthcare surprises, family support, policy changes, or shifts in Social Security rules. What's fascinating is that many people stall precisely when they're about to enter the most powerful phase of growth. The gap between doing fine and truly comfortable is often just a few more years of disciplined consistency. And to understand why some people glide through this stage while others get stuck in it, we need to talk about something that goes beyond the numbers. Many people assume it gets easier simply because the numbers get bigger. But if I'm being honest with you, it's not just math, it's identity. After 15, 20, or 25 years of practicing retirement planning consistently, you're not the same person who started. You've lived through market crashes. You've watched your portfolio drop. You've resisted the urge to make emotional 401k mistakes during moments of panic, and that builds something incredibly valuable: emotional stability. When you invest for decades, the habit stops requiring constant willpower. It becomes automatic. Contributions happen without internal debate. You understand how investing for retirement works. You've chosen your broad ETFs or solid companies. You've adjusted your strategy as life evolved. Instead of chasing shortcuts, you execute the plan. And consistent execution is far more powerful than occasional enthusiasm. At a certain point, you stop learning how to invest and start managing growth. It's a subtle but profound shift. Anxiety decreases. Social Security becomes part of a structured plan rather than an intimidating unknown. The internal dialogue changes from "will this be enough?" to "how do I organize this efficiently?" That mental shift reduces mistakes and increases clarity. And here's the interesting part. When your identity changes, your decisions change. You think long-term with more calm. You avoid emotional swings. You begin to see wealth as a tool, not a trophy. But this new stage requires a different skill set. Because after $500K, the game is no longer just about accumulation. It becomes about optimization. Before $500K, the focus is construction. After that point, the nature of the game begins to shift. You're no longer just building retirement savings, you're organizing efficiency. The question stops being, how much can I invest this month? And becomes, how do I structure this intelligently? It's a subtle transition, but it completely transforms your retirement planning strategy. Now the decisions become more refined, balancing growth and protection, improving tax efficiency, coordinating with Social Security, planning sustainable withdrawal strategies. You might start studying different withdrawal approaches, diversifying between broad ETFs and high-quality fixed income, or reviewing past 401k mistakes to correct them before retirement. It's no longer about brute force, it's about precision. I've seen people cross the $500,000 mark and begin viewing money as a system, not just a number. They calmly adjusted allocations, planned when to claim benefits, reflected seriously on how to retire with purpose, not just with sufficient assets. Some rediscovered hobbies, explored volunteering, or began creative projects because the conversation shifted from survival to meaning. That's a mature form of financial freedom. But here's the gentle challenge I'll leave you with. The difference between someone who arrives at this stage calmly and someone who feels insecure isn't just the size of the portfolio, it's the consistency maintained before the turning point. And that naturally leads us to the larger reflection that underpins this entire theme.